3,000 voter registrations on hold. Why? Infractions as simple as missing a hyphen in a name and a name ID kept Americans from casting their ballots in November. Despite the modern-day efforts for voter suppression, like in Georgia and Alabama and across this nation, we as Democrats have put forth H.R. 4, the Voting Rights Advancement Act. And with the help of all of you, we will put it on the floor and we will pass it. We have to make sure, yes, we have to make sure that the Republicans know that it's unacceptable that in 2019 they're not supporting voting rights. What has changed since 2006 when so many Republicans joined us Democrats in passing the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and reauthorizing it for 25 more years? Despite these efforts, House Democrats have remained steadfast in our efforts to honor this promise. We will pass H.R. 4, and we dare the Republicans to join us in making sure that every American has the right to vote. Next, we will hear from Speaker Nancy Pelosi, no one has been more of a fierce advocate for the right to vote and to restore the Voting Rights Act of 1965 than our Speaker, Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Terry Sewell, for your strong leadership on behalf of the United States of America. As we go forward to this next period of time as we celebrate the 4th of July, we want to celebrate liberty and justice for all, and that means everyone having access to the vote. It was a few years ago that many of us stood on the steps of the Supreme Court when they heard the arguments in the Shelby versus Holder case. The Black Caucus led the way for us that day. And then a few years later, a short time later, that day, by the way, I think it's interesting to note, my colleagues, that day we went to the steps of the Supreme Court to speak out for voting rights in our country, and then we across the street came to the Capitol and dedicated a statue to Rosa Parks that would appear in the Capitol of the United States. Our Republican colleagues did not see any just challenge to their conscience to think that they should be, if they're honoring Rosa Parks, they should be joining us in the arguments before the court. But they didn't. But nonetheless, the court came down with its decision in 2013. Today, we mark the 6th anniversary of Shelby versus Holder, most unfortunate decision. But John Lewis will speak next, our champion, our hero, our icon. He was part of writing that bill that they struck parts of it down. He was part of when we stood on the steps, as Terry Sewell said. We came down those steps in a bipartisan way with overwhelming support in the House and the Senate for the Voting Rights Act. I walked down with Senator Frist, the majority leader in the Senate at the time. And yet the court said we did not have a strong enough constitutional basis, so here we are. I'm going to join Terry Sewell in commending the groups who are here with us, all of our members who are here, and you'll be hearing from some of them. But this is very important. This is about patriotism for America. It's about the right to vote, the sacred privilege contained in our Constitution, hard fought for, amended into law. It's something we cannot let them take away from us, the legitimacy of America. And we have no stronger champion in that regard, and no deeper inspiration, no stronger fighter for all of that than the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. John Lewis. Yay!
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for those kind words. I've said this before, and I will say it again. The vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It is the most powerful, non-violent tool we have in a democracy. There are forces in this country that want to keep American citizens from having a rightful say in the future of our nation. That's why the VRA was gutted. We have to change that. We must change it, and we will. Congress must change it. We have the power, and we must do all we can on our own watch, in our own time, to make sure the work of democracy continues in this country. I'm deeply and very concerned about the future of our democracy. Seems like the lights are about to go out. We must have the capacity and the ability to redeem the soul of this nation and set it on the right course. We must do all we can to make this nation where justice and the voice of the people prevail. Now it is my delight and great pleasure to present a young man from the great city of New York, Jerry Nadler.
Thank you very much, John. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 is one of the most effective civil rights statutes that was ever enacted into law. 6 years ago today, however, the Supreme Court issued its disastrous decision in Shelby County versus Holder and thereby effectively gutted the Act's central enforcement provision known as the preclearance requirement. Before the Voting Rights Act, states and localities routinely passed voter suppression laws, secure in the knowledge that it could take many years before the laws could be successfully challenged in court, if at all. As soon as one law was overturned by the courts, another would be enacted, essentially setting up a discriminatory game of whack-a-mole. Section 5's preclearance provision broke this legal logjam and helped to stop this discriminatory practice. The success of the VRA, with its effective preclearance requirement, was apparent almost immediately, with registration of African American voters more than doubling in the South within just 4 years of enactment. By striking down the formula for determining which states and localities are subject to the preclearance requirement, the Shelby County decision effectively suspended the operation of the preclearance requirement itself, and in its absence, the game of whack-a-mole has returned with a vengeance. Since the Shelby County decision, we have seen the emergence of other voter suppression measures, like burdensome proof of citizenship laws, significant scalebacks to early voting periods, restrictions on absentee ballots, and laws that make it difficult to restore the voting rights of formerly incarcerated individuals, and many others. These kinds of voting practices have a very disproportionate negative impact on minority voters, and they are intended to. In the most recent elections in November of 2018, voters across the country encountered barriers to voting from state and local laws and circumstances that made it hard or even impossible to vote. For example, in Georgia, as was already mentioned, 53,000 voter registrants, 70% of whom were African American, were placed in pending status by the Secretary of State because of minor misspellings on their voter registration forms. While it is true that those seeking to enforce the Voting Rights Act can still pursue after-the-fact legal remedies, even without preclearance, time and experience have proven that such an approach takes far longer, is far more expensive than having an effective preclearance regime. And once a vote has been denied, it cannot be recast. The damage to our democracy is permanent. That is why we hope that members on both sides of the aisles, in both chambers of Congress, will come together and pass legislation to restore the Voting Rights Act and its preclearance requirement to full vitality. Today, the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution is holding a hearing to provide an important opportunity to renew our understanding of the importance of the Voting Rights Act and its preclearance provision, and to support our efforts to craft a legislative solution. We pledge that before the year is out, we will pass a new Voting Rights Act renewal with a new preclearance requirement that will again make voting the sacred right that it is and give it effective enforcement. Thank you.
Now the subcommittee chair of Constitution on the Judiciary Committee, Steve Cohen.
Thank you. We will be having a hearing after votes, and our primary witness will be Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams was the victim of much of what Georgia did to restrict the vote, and it was done intentionally to limit the African American vote and to not elect a Democrat, particularly an African American woman. The person who was most responsible for implementing those laws and taking people off the voting rolls was